Today I'm sharing how I choose and cut my papers for Kendra's Card Challenge 23 using the Stay Cool collection from the Stamps of Life. Hey, it's Beth. Welcome. Today I am going to be playing with the Stay Cool collection card kit from the Stamps of Life. I am going to be making or prepping another set of cards for Kendra's Card Challenge 23. And I'm going to be using the kit that Stamps of Life has sent me. So real quick, I just kind of want to walk through what's in this kit. It's got these really fun like popsicle images in the paper pad. So the kit has a 24 sheet pad that's included, and it is double-sided. This is the Stay Cool pad. So you can see you've got like just fun popsicles. And the back side is more of a solid with popsicle images. You get 2 of each sheet. You've got like the partially eaten popsicles. And then each of their pads comes with several sheets of like ephemera that you could either die cut out if you have the coordinating die, or I usually just end up fussy cutting them out. This one you can use with the cool ice pop dies that they have and like line them up and it would cut these out for you. And then we have some Stay Cool words, polka dots. Here's another set of sheets of the images that you can cut. This one would use the more ice pop dies. So I will definitely be fussy cutting those to use as some fun embellishment pieces. And then you also get like varying scales of some of the images and patterns as well. So definitely a fun pad. I can see this pad, I will definitely be going to this for more cards for Cubs cards, because this, like the Stay Cool sentiment, I use that quite a bit. And so that would definitely be some fun cards that I could make with this pad for Cards for Cubs. Then you get this gorgeous rainbow ribbon. I love that. There are some sequined popsicle embellishments, some enamel star embellishments. The die set, it says Stay Cool, and you get the words for stay and cool, but then you also get the background pieces as well. So there are 4 pieces in here, and that allows you to have the layered Stay Cool words. Then you have some fun enamel sticker embellishments that coordinate with the papers. There's a set of stickers that has sentiments on it. Envelopes that you can use for your cards. And then they also include a shaped card die. So this one, it's an A1 size, and it's got like this fun little, I don't know, whimsical outline to it. And so you have, you know, the front of the card, and then this is the back side of the card, and then they are connected kind of like here in the middle. And so then once you would cut it out, you would be able to fold it and then have your card ready to go. So I think that's really fun. And then you get a nice variety of cardstock as well that coordinate with the paper pads. And so the pads will tell you which cardstocks go with the colors in the pad. So we have grape, raspberry, watermelon, bubblegum. There's some white, ocean, and then they'll have, oh, there it is, ocean, blue jay, pineapple, and kiwi. So those are all listed at the bottom of the pad. So if you ever order a pad, you can reference, you know, which color of the cardstock they go with. And then if you get the kit, they also give you the cardstocks that coordinate with the pad in the kit. So that is what I am going to be using to create my cards, this round of cards with. So my next step will be to choose my papers and then get them cut down. And then we will also be creating a card today. So I went ahead and went through the pad and pulled out 6 patterns that I wanted to use. I haven't necessarily match them up with the cutting guides yet. I just kind of picked 6 patterns. And one thing I did keep in mind was that for this particular challenge, there are a lot of like small and thin pieces that you're cutting down. And like the last two, you do have, there are a couple of times where you do have some bigger chunks, but I tried to keep that in mind and go with like the smaller scale. Cause like I said, one nice thing about Stamps of Life pads is they give you kind of different scale sizes. So you can see the difference here in this pattern versus this pattern, like the size of the images in the patterns. And so I tried to, and it's kind of like the last half of the pad was more of the smaller scale and the first half was like the larger scale. So I kind of kept to the last half of the pad and went with the smaller scale images. So I went with the smaller polka dot, the smaller pop, like multi-popsicles, and then the smaller, like partially eaten popsicles. And then I went with like plaid, which is like a nice general pattern, non-directional. Same with the stripe. Oh, and then this one, the Stay Cool, I went with the smaller Stay Cool words. So I did try to be conscious about the size of the patterns that I was using. And then in this particular case, because there are a lot of strips and smaller pieces and things are going to get turned on the cards, I did try to do, I ended up doing half like directional and half non-directional. So on these directional patterns though, if it works out that, you know, the piece goes on the card and the pattern's going to be facing the wrong direction, I do have the luxury of the back side that I can use as well that are pretty much non-directional. This one's even a solid. So that's kind of a tip for you if you are new to the challenge and you are using directional paper. If there's a, you know, I would hope that it has a B side as well, because then if it's directional, then you can always just flip it over and use the other side of the piece. And I do that all the time. So on the cutting guide, like there are arrows that tell you which way the pattern of your piece will face once you, like you cut it. And then, you know, once it goes on the card, so like this particular strip here, 4, it's got an arrow that's going that way. So that means that your pattern is going to be turned horizontal. So if you have a directional pattern, then it's going to end up horizontal on the card itself. Now, something else you can do, and I do this as well, if the direction of your patterns doesn't work out necessarily, you know, with the cut, like this particular card, the last set I made, I did end up turning it into vertical orientation. So you can change the orientation of your card as well if you don't have a B-side, and all of your patterns are maybe, or, you know, like if it works for the all the patterns you have on it, you can always change the orientation and make it work that way for you. Something else to keep in mind. So the cutting guides, you know, they have the arrows that tell you which direction the piece is going to go. Each piece also has a number associated with it, and that tells you which card sketch it's going to go with. And then you also have, you know, the measurements for the pieces. And then on the cutting guide, you also get the scissors, which tells you where to make your first cut. So that's always where I start, and then I always look for the next line that goes all the way through. So I'm going to try and look through the cutting guides and like the size of the pieces that I'm cutting and like kind of directions. And I think they're all pretty much multi-direction cuts. So I can have to keep that in mind. But so knowing that, like, you know, my initial thought would be to make it a non-directional pattern, but I know I can make these two pieces work even with a directional pattern, because these are the only two pieces that are going to be horizontal. The rest are either vertical or at an angle, and so this pattern would work for that as well. So I might actually go with the smaller pattern though, since we do have some smaller strips, and you would still be able to see the popsicle, know that it's a popsicle, even if I cut those small strips. So I think I'm going to go with this for A on my initial thought. B, the only thing, there is a horizontal piece here, and then one of the circle parts is horizontal. But I do think most of them... Okay, so this one's all vertical except for one strip. So I might go with this for F. So jumping from A to F. And then these are like small ones. The small piece, oh, there's a big one of those. So if you look at sketch 10... Okay, so I think this was another one that I ended up changing the orientation on. Instead of horizontal, I made it vertical because of the direction of my paper. So I might go... And these larger pieces are usually tend to be like a matte on the cards, so that's something to think about as well. So I might just go with this for B. And then maybe this for C. And then D. I don't know, I'd really like to have one of these for... maybe D, and I might actually switch these up because I would rather have this as a matte than like this busier pattern, if that makes sense. So that's my kind of first step with a cutting guide, is trying to match up patterns that I want to use with the particular cutting guides. And then on the very last sheet of the cutting of the PDF, you have a fancy little chart here that tells you the cutting guides across the top, like the letters of the cutting guides across the top, and the numbers of the sketches down the left. And then you can figure out which patterns are going to go together on which cards. So depending on the challenge, I kind of use this differently. Like in this particular case, you have several cards where there's like one or maybe two patterns, but I know like here you have 3, 4 cards that only use one of the patterns. And so I wouldn't necessarily want to maybe use this one as my one pattern. I would want something a little more bright and colorful that I can work with. So A is the only one used on sketches 1 and 2. So that works for me. Sketch 3 uses everything, that's fine. Sketch 4 only uses A. 5 uses everything but F, so those work well together. 6 uses B and C, and I do like those. You get a contrasting type of pattern because we have a directional with words and then kind of just a generic stripe pattern that's non-directional. 7 only uses B. That's one thing I said I kind of wanted to avoid. But I know on the sketch I could always bring in another pattern to use for these gray pieces, because on the sketch itself you have these two colored pieces. The pink pieces are labeled B, so those come from a cutting guide. The gray, these two gray pieces, all of the white pieces, and then the black pieces are all free choice. So they're not associated with a cutting guide. They're just additional pieces you can use or matting layers. So I could potentially bring in some more like an extra sheet of pattern paper and use that here. I'm going to have scraps from that, but that's okay because I will just leave that with the pad. So I might do that. So I think I'm okay breaking my rule that I just told you and leaving this Stay Cool as B. 8, sketch 8 uses C and D, which are these two. I don't love that. So what if I switch cutting guide B and cutting guide C are not super similar, but size-wise the pieces work. So what if I switch these two? And so then this would be the pattern on sketch 7, and then these two would be together for sketch 8. I like that better. Because then 6 was B and C, which, yeah, that still works. All right, 9 is B, C, D, E, and F. 10 is A through D, or A through E. 11 uses A, C, D, and E. Like, those are all fine. A, C, D, and E. You get a mix of patterns. 12 is C, D, E, which, again, you can have a mix of patterns. 13 is and 14 are only E and F. Those work. And then 15 is B and C, and then E and F. So yes, that works. So pattern or cutting guide A, B, C, D, E, F. Now, it doesn't always have to be this in-depth of a process, especially if you have like all non-directional paper and there's similar patterns. You can just use it's not as big of a deal which ones you use with which cutting guides. And if you're just starting out, maybe don't even worry about it. Try to pick some non-directional paper, or at least some double-sided paper, and then just roll with it. So now that I have those figured out, I can go ahead and start cutting them down. Now I have baggies, like some of them, these are not fancy, as you can see. Some of them are reused, like cellophane bags that I cut the tops off. Some of them are baggies that I had, like regular Ziploc type baggies that I had craft stuff stored in that I am reusing for these. So you don't need a fancy storage system. And then I just have Post-its with numbers on them. You can go fancier. You can use, the sleeves like that you would put A2 cards in. You could definitely use those. Add, nicer labels with your numbers on them, or somehow, affix a number onto your bag. You could use envelopes. If you are doing this kind of all together and you have the space, you could have numbered piles on your desk. I don't have that space here on my video desk. And so I like the baggies, and then that way I can also come back to them anytime. I can kind of put them away and then come back to them another time and finish off the cards. I don't have to keep them out on my desk. So I will be using these as I cut my pieces down. So now that we have all of that figured out, now we can go ahead and get into the cutting. Now we can go ahead and start our cutting, starting with cutting guide A and starting where the scissor mark is. And it's usually the first, cut that you can make all the way through your paper. And then from there, I just kind of work through the pieces, like finding the next line that cuts through the pieces that I'm working on. And then I go and with the larger uncut piece that I have left, I kind of figure out what is the next line that goes all the way through. And I was excited because that particular strip was just wide enough to show the full like popsicle. So I just thought that was kind of fun, and will look good on a card. So I'm continuing to work my way through, looking for the next line that cuts all the way through. So at this point, I was reminded of the fact that Stamps of Life pads are actually 6.5 inches tall by 6 inches wide. And so I did end up cutting an extra 1/2 inch strip off and setting that to the side. I am kind of excited about that because that will help me with some of the cutting guides, like starting with cutting guide B actually. It just gives me a little more wiggle room for when I'm punching like the circles out from the strips that I'm cutting down. So you can see I have I have put the pieces as I cut them in the same kind of layout that they are on the cutting guide, and this just helps me to get them into the correct numbered baggies. So I'm referencing the cutting guide for that particular piece and then find that numbered baggie and then add the pieces to it. And this just helps me stay organized and keep things together. For cutting guide B, again, starting with that scissor line because it's going to go all the way through. And actually, I did go ahead and take my 1/2 inch off on that one before I started actually into the cutting guide. And sometimes, you know, it just gives you a little extra work. You can save it to the end. But rather than have a bunch of tiny little pieces, 1/2 inch pieces, a lot of times I would rather have a longer strip that I can do something with later on. And I will use those on the insides of the cards. Most likely that's where they'll go. Or I know there are a couple of sketches that have additional strips that are needed that aren't part of the cutting guides, and so I can incorporate them that way as well. And for that circle element, it was a 1-inch circle, and I happen to have a 1-inch circle punch, so I just used that. You could use dies, you could trace something that was about, you know, that size of the circle you needed as well and fussy cut it out. You can also just leave it square if you need to. And then I needed to cut it in half so that I can separate it into the appropriate baggies. And then now we are ready to move on to cutting guide C. Again, starting with the scissor mark and working my way through. And this time I'm leaving the 1/2 inch on there because there are 2 circles that needed to be cut out, and I just wanted to give myself a little extra leeway room as far as, you know, being able to hold on to the strip, or maybe giving myself some extra room to punch the circle and still get the other pieces that I need to out of it. So this one calls for a 1-inch circle and a 3/4 inch circle. And so I happen to have both of those punches. And I am using EK Success punches, and I have like pretty much every size from a 1/4 inch up through 2 1/4, I believe. So they're kind of like nesting circles, if you will, but in the punch form. And I like them. They're really easy to use. They punch really well. So if you're interested in those, they are linked in the description box below. And then once I got my circles cut out, I did cut off that extra 1/2 inch strip from the rest of what was left. If you are new to Kendra's Card Challenges, this is a quarterly PDF workbook that she puts together, and it has cutting guides for 6 6x6 sheets of pattern paper, as well as sketches that help you turn those 6 sheets into 15 cards. There will be a link in the description box below to her video where she kind of introduces the challenge, and then also a link to her Patreon site where you can download the challenge PDF. She does ask that you sign up for a free Patreon account to do that, and it just means you put in your email address and kind of you set up a free account, and this just signs you up for her email list so that you could be notified of when the next challenge comes out or any inspiration or other prize opportunities that are happening along the way. If you would like to sign up for a paid Patreon account. She does have quite a few member levels for that, and there are a lot of great benefits. You can see those on the back page of the PDF or on her website as well. And some of those fun benefits include access to archive challenges, card kits, various levels of card kits sent to you, Happy Mail, things like that. So extra videos. So definitely check that out and find the level that works for you if you're interested. There are also ways to have opportunities to win prizes. So if you scan the QR codes that are on the front page of the PDF, there are 3 codes, one for each month of the quarter. This quarter we're in July 2026 through September of 2026, and once per quarter you can upload a photo of all 15 of your cards in the same photo. And if you upload those, you can have a chance to win one of the monthly prizes and quarterly prizes. And thanks to sponsors like the Stamps of Life, we have tons of prizes available. So be sure to submit your photos for a chance to win. And just also make sure that when you are creating your cards, you have some liberties to how you can adjust the sketches to make them work for you, but just make sure that your cards look similar enough to the sketches that they can be, identified, to that sketch. So now that I have all of my circles punched for this one, I was able to cut my extra half-inch strip off that last bit. And here I'm just showing you that there were some quite a few extra pieces on this cutting guide, and those can definitely be used on the insides of cards or to create, extra embellishments for the front of your cards. So it'll still help you use up the last bits of scraps. And then now we get to move on to the last page of cutting guides, which are guides E and F. Again, starting with the scissors and finding that next line that cuts all the way through. The cutting process doesn't usually take very long, like maybe 20 minutes just to get everything cut down and assigned, to the baggies that I have for them. I think one of the most difficult parts of the challenge for me are just, figuring out the papers that I want to start with, and then, finding the embellishments and sentiments to use for them. The most time-consuming part of the challenge is, adding all of the matting layers to the cards, as I'm creating them. But it's still not hard. It's just, a process, trying to find like the right colors that I want to use for the matting layers and things like that. And we'll kind of talk more about that. I am going to make 2 cards with you today, so we'll kind of talk more about that as I'm making the cards. But before I forget, I also wanted to let you know that if you don't like, you don't have time to do the cutting, or maybe it's not something you enjoy, maybe you have, arthritis or something like that prevents you, from, being able to use your trimmer very much. She does offer SVGs for the cutting guide. So if you have an electronic cutting guide like a Cricut or a Silhouette or Scan and Cut, she does offer SVGs for sale that will take your 6x6 papers and kind of, cut those down for you. And then also she has a matte layer cutting guide available for sale. So it takes, 8.5 by 11 sheets of cardstock and helps you to cut down all of your mats at one time, and then you can just assign them to the sketches. So if you're using the same color of mats for all of your cards, then you can do that, and it makes that process so much simpler as well. But again, those are for sale on her website. So for F, I went ahead and cut off my half-inch strip in the beginning because I didn't think I would need the extra room for my circles. This cutting guide goes pretty quickly because there are some larger pieces and then some larger circles that will be punched. So I'm just kind of working my way through the cutting guide, and I will come back to those circles here at the very end. And the circles for this one are 1 3/4 and 2 inches. So I'm going to start with the 2-inch punch, and again I'm going as close to the end of that strip as I can, still being able to punch the full circle. And you can see like it kind of, there's not much at the end left there. And then I'm going to do the 2 1 3/4 inch punch and kind of angle them or change, like they're not directly in line with each other, they're kind of cockeyed to each other to help get the full circles out of that strip. Again, you could use dies if you wanted. And then get these last bits in their baggies, and then all of my baggies are full and ready for assembly. So we are going to be starting with sketch 2 today, and I chose this one because of all of the strips that it's using, and I just think it's kind of a fun look once it's done. So I am following the measurements that are on the sketch for all these extra elements. And so these strips that I have right here were the extra 1/2 inch that I had cut off from, you know, the tops of my papers. If you don't have this, you could bring in additional pattern paper or just use cardstock. So on sketch 2, if you look at sketch 2, the blue strips came from the cutting guide, and then the black, white, and gray pieces, you know, both strips and other layers, are free choice. So I brought in a white matte layer to go behind my strips, and then I will bring in some other colored cardstock to do the other layers, and then for those extra strips, you know, I brought in some additional pattern paper. So for your free choice, like I said, you could do more pattern paper, you could do regular cardstock, specialty cardstock, embossed cardstock, vellum, you know, whatever it is that you would like to use. And on some of those extra matting layers, you don't even have to include them. If that's not something that you want to do, you don't have to do that. Again, free choice. And I mentioned that I was following the measurements on the card sketch. So each sketch has its own measurements. And so if you don't want to cut down all 6 sheets of paper at one time and deal with all 15 cards at one time, you can do one sketch at a time. So again, you can make this challenge work for you however, you know, it works best for you. And some of these sketches are great to use scraps. So if you have scraps in your stash, use the individual sketches and, you know, put those scraps to use on the challenge, because this one I think would be great for scraps, because I always end up with a bunch of strips left over, and so there are a lot of strips in this challenge. So I have all of my strips angled on this card, or on this matting layer, and then I'm going to bring in the green and pink from the cardstock that came in the kit, and I'm going to put the pink directly behind my strip piece, and then the green is going to be my matting layer. So these are all A2 size cards that the sketches make. You can adapt them to, you know, different sizes if you need to. You would just have to change the measurements of the individual pieces to fit the card size you're using. So I have my layers down and can add this piece. And then, you know, she has like a shape there in the center, which could be a sentiment, it could be an embellishment. And again, you have some free choice. You don't have to do the exact shape she has. You can, you know, kind of play with that as well. Here I use some of those bits that I cut off from the, you know, around that was overhanging on the card, and added those on the inside of the card. So the die, the Stay Cool die that came with the kit, I really wanted to use that, and I was trying to make it fit, and I just didn't like it. So I ended up bringing in the Bold Inspiration stamp set from the Stamps of Life, and this is one of my like favorites, just because it's got some, you know, nice large sentiments. So if you need to, rather than embellishments, if you want to fill the front of your card with a larger sentiment and make that the focal point, you know, this is a great stamp set for that. I went with Hey You, and then I just I took that over to my die cutter, cut a circle around the Hey You, and then I used some of that pink cardstock to create a matte layer behind it. And then I'm just going to bring in these like enamel popsicles stickers and just add one of those on there. I tried to see if the stars were worked, but the colors were a little different. So next we're going to move to sketch 11, and I chose this one because of all the little tiny bits. And I have some tips to help on this one as well. So I'm starting by cutting down the layer recommended on the sketch, and I just went with white cardstock. And so I'm trying to kind of just get a feel for the patterns that I have and how I might want to lay them out on this piece. I did go to the B side of 2 of them just because the orientation was not correct for the pattern that was on there. And now that I have them arranged, I'm going to go ahead and add them down. So on the bottom here, I am simply just starting in the bottom left corner, lining them up with the bottom of my white cardstock. And so by doing this, just because of how I cut down my papers, some of these were parts of generous cuts, so they're a little bit longer than the others, and some of them were a little bit shorter. And you'll see it's kind of a staggered look. So when I got to the top, and I'm trying to show you now, you can kind of see the jagged look there. So on the top, I took one of my shorter pieces, and that's what's going down first, and then I am lining up the rest of the pieces with the bottom of that shorter piece. And so there's going to be some overhanging the top of my white cardstock, and I will just trim that off. And so that helps me get a little bit straighter of a line, but somehow I ended up getting a little crooked. So I'm going to trim off the overhang from the top and then those 2 side bits. And then so you can see it's straighter, but then it goes at an angle. So a couple ways that you can fix this. First, I'm going to go ahead and get my matting layer on there using the green, and then I wanted to back that piece with the strips on it with the pink just to help it stand out from that busier pattern behind it. So I measured the open space there in between my 2 strips, and this may be different for everybody, so I'm not going to give you my measurements, but I cut a piece of white cardstock that I could layer over that if I want. Another option is if you have like peel-off strips, you could use those to cover up the seam, or in this case, I had some thin strips of cardstock left from me cutting down my card mats, and I just put those over the edges of my strips there, and then it just kind of covers it up and makes it look a little cleaner. So there are different ways that you could fix it if it wasn't straight or didn't look right to you. Again, I tried that Stay Cool die, it didn't work. Ended up going back to the Hey You sentiment. I'm going to stamp it on some white cardstock, and again go die cut a circle, and then use some more. I'm going to take that pink matting piece and then cut my matting layer circle out of that as well. And then now I can go ahead and assemble. I'm just putting some glue around the very edges of that white piece since the center of the pink is gone, and then build the card from here. So as you're working your way through the challenge, if you have any sketches that give you trouble or have given you trouble or intimidate you, let me know that in the comments below, because I'll have 2 other sets that I'm going to be making from this challenge, and sharing my cutting guide or my cutting process for using the cutting guides and assembly of a couple cards. So if there are some sketches that are giving you trouble, let me know those in the description box below, and I can try and cover those in my last couple of videos. And then I will also have the full assembly of all 15 cards, like the process of that later on. It won't be a tutorial type video. It'll just be more of an assembly process, and with some music, so you can kind of watch through there as well. But hope you guys got some helpful tips and information. Again, please be sure to check the description box below for the links and additional information. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you guys all have a very crafty day.